Welcome everybody to the next event in the DSA seminar series. Today we're delighted to have Matt Cockbill speaking to us. So Matt is from Berwick Partners, and which is a recruitment firm with offices in the UK and all over the world. So Matt is a managing partner at the organisation, and today he's going to be talking to us about careers in data science. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Matt, now.
Awesome. Thanks very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. It's helped by the fact that I can't see anybody on here at the moment because I've got the presentation up, so I don't know whether I'm talking to 2 people or 200. So I think as we go through the presentation, if there are questions, would you load them to the back end? Because actually I've got a couple of slides. We'll work through those quite quickly, and then we'll get into any discussion we can happily have. So my role here, I lead a IT and digital leadership practice. So for the last 20 something years, I've recruited nothing but technology leaders, and a critical part of that armory in over the last 10 years or so has become the rise of the sort of data science specialists, the data science world and data science careers. First slide, we'll get that out of the way. There's some advertorial about who and what we do, and we recruit in all markets in the UK and all sectors and all functions. And the one that sort of matters here very much is IT and digital, just here. So I'm going to move on from that. I found this as a fascinating piece. So data, a lot of people in terms of the market at large, are talking about data as being the new oil and all that kind of stuff that's been kicking around for a few years now. In reality, data has always been there, and it's always been a critical part of decision making and supporting smart business decisions. The sort of steady evolution since the 40s, and anybody who has seen the sort of Enigma code stuff understands exactly how material that was in terms of changing world events. But we've got a steady evolution over the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but it is in the last decade that things have fundamentally expanded, and that is now expanding at a far greater rate. Seating that in the here and now, there's some stats here which I'm sure many of you will be aware of, but the just sheer volumes of data that businesses are engaging with are phenomenal. And whether you look into kind of business journalism to look at the kind of the sort of the application and the headlines with it. So this quote there from Forbes, which is around the kind of the volumes of data that's going to be captured, copied, and consumed in the coming sort of decade, in the last decade and the coming few years is phenomenal. But if we then sort of look at that in terms of growth with 4 or 5 years forward, we're rapidly accelerating beyond what had been previously created in decades. This is clearly picking up traction with not only those people who want to use data, but those people who are helping and deliver the solutions and services and technology that help us exploit it. So the Cisco's is this world and the Junipers this world, as they reach out into internet connected devices, wearable devices, anything that could be web connected, be it edge computing or 5G and beyond. The future for the capture, exploitation, and use of data is nothing other than bright. And the simple audience numbers, I think, if we look at this alone, of 5 billion internet users, topping out in the next 2 years, are numbers that would previously be utterly unthinkable and unheard of. Why are we here? Well, we recruit nothing but technology leaders, and data has a huge part to play. The most exciting period of change in our space is very much, you could say, amongst us, and I'll come on to the COVID effect shortly. But there's a lot of uncertainty about the impact of data, be it dressed up as artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, robotic process automation, However it is dressed up in the workplace, it is, at the headline there, causing a lot of concern for some people. 85 million workers displaced by automation. But the next point being the other piece, you've got 97 million jobs worldwide created by robot revolution over the next 5 years. So, are more than compensated by the growth opportunities, more than compensating the loss and displacement of jobs, and that's already manifesting into customer service-led organisations, as you may see within your life, as you talk to your bank, talk to your utility provider, talk to any service-based product, as most of those initial conversations are in some way, shape, or form with a chatbot. With a degree of automated self-service that enables the organisation to bring human resources into higher value transactions, higher value interactions with customers, where really businesses can begin to define competitive advantage. Through to the other side of that other end of that, so you've gone from the highly commoditized to the highly specialized and repeatable aspects of financial trading and so forth, where they absolutely rely on the kind of the speed of robots and process to make repeat and sustainable choices on transactions. I think the third point we're talking about here is just about that kind of democratization of data that we're seeing within the third and fourth point actually here, democratization of data in the workplace, and this investment of that companies and businesses are making in both creating their own data lakes, their own data sources, their own data resources and assets, but also then trading those and buying those and refreshing those on a regular basis. So very, very quickly, we've moved from those being those organizations who are investing in data assets as being pioneers into that, as to being a regular run-of-the-mill part of the economy. And with that, there is a drive to start to recognize the value of data assets in things like company balance sheets. So I mentioned the COVID effect earlier on. Change always breeds opportunity where it's regards to people and leadership. Top point here has been a great source of reassurance for those of us who recruit in this world, that says the sort of IT leaders of this world are accelerating the adoption of machine learning throughout COVID-19. I think most organizations, you may have seen the infamous meme that sort of asks the question of who has done most for your digital transformation. 3 options: CEO, CIO/CTO, and COVID-19, and COVID-19 being the circled option. I don't know, and my stock in trade is recruiting CIOs and CTOs. I don't know a single CIO or CTO who felt that at the beginning of the pandemic, they don't feel they delivered anything particularly remarkable. They rolled out enterprise class technology to enable remote working, but the access that gained for them, the platform that gave to them in creating continuity, enabling new ways of working, the shift to digital delivery, has been the exciting piece. And that's really where these senior stakeholders have been embracing the opportunity to innovate, working off the trust they earned in pivoting businesses from office and factory and so forth to remote working, be that in simple service-based environments where they're kind of just making contact centers and so forth remote, through to using things like the Google lenses on the Google glasses to start to do remote machine diagnostic on sort of heavy engineering parts and so forth. So as we couldn't move around, using technology to bring the problem to the person who could solve it. Interestingly, some interesting states from the US, where actually throughout the whole pandemic period, they've seen businesses investing in those teams. Again, a positive sign for the future. And again, digitization world brought out a brilliant stat, which was which is good news to those of you who are investing in your careers and into your education in this space, which is that the biggest barrier to AI adoption, and behind that say any other source of data science, is a shortage of skills. And I think shortage of skills is something we have to sort of really kind of drill into, because that is also a case of, not only is there not the right volume of people, appropriately qualified, certified and experienced people, but also competition for them is hugely competitive. So the long and short of it is, those who invest in these skills, who build their careers around it, will have options as they go forward. Everybody loves a graph. As you can see, the last 9 years have seen a pretty substantive sort of drive upwards in the demand for the data professions, and actually that has been recognised both in public and private sectors by a kind of, and I think if I think back to about 2012, 2013, when clients were going, we need one of those people who understand data, and that would be about as thick as a brief would get, to saying those people who can look at, and it was largely a question of data husbandry, so looking at just the sort of taxonomy of data and kind of broadly information management plus. We're now into a world where there are well-established, well-understood, regimented career paths throughout a whole host of different data professions, both in the levels of security, architecture, development, etc. And we'll come into that a little bit further on. But as you can see, a meteoric rise, with the only the major substantive drop being through 2020, as per just about every other profession that you could point a finger at. Demand dropped off throughout the height of the pandemic, being kind of midpoint 2020. But as with almost all other areas, there's been a steady decline, steady increase back up to demand, albeit, as you can see here, much more marked in data. Reward trends, I think, would be an interesting proposition. So you've got, as with most professions, you kind of see a sort of a tailing off at the top. The mid bands here are where the majority of people are earning, but what I was hoping to get and couldn't get quite ready for you today was some trended analysis on salary over time. This is over the last sort of 6 months up to mid-May. If you were to look year on year, that whole block is coming across, and indeed I was able to source one graph from about a year ago, and it really had nothing to the right of 100. I would say, right, myself and my colleague who's with us here today, Emily Hudson, who work primarily in the kind of 80 to 150 bracket. We would say that actually the biggest competition is in this higher end here. Now that comes with sort of time at the crease, leading and building teams, shaping capabilities. These are sort of distorted a little by the salaries of those in the consulting domain, but nevertheless, I think what you'll see from this is, from entry points, there is a fairly strong acceleration through the ranks in terms of reward. So your investments in your personal development are not wasted. I talked about the sort of the areas and the domains and the career paths. This is an interesting sort of stat around co-occurring skills, and this is just drawn from advertised roles over the last 6 months again, where data science as a discipline is quoted alongside other things. Again, this really just shows the breadth of reach that you can go from sort of the scientific element of R&D through to some quite specific, deeper engineering skills. There you pick out your finance domains. There are elements in here that are always looking at the academic investment alongside with data science. We've got all sorts of different technologies in here, which are of the moment, be it Kubernetes, albeit that's not so new these days, through to the core languages at the heart of this. The one that made me chuckle and really thought I would include this was social skills, which is quite an, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, I'm sure, but it is social skills at the heart of this, because if we were to go through some of these and say software development, software engineering, DevOps, data analytics, ETL folk, analytical people, even finance people, these are not domains where people would anticipate you would have the most naturally gregarious and outgoing people. And I think at the heart of this, and sort of this next slide was something that said it all for me actually, which was, you know, as you read this, the gap between good analytics that harbour potential value and actually realising that value is one that data literacy is intended to bridge. And that's the piece. So we've got data literacy at a fundamental level of understanding this, being the route to deriving value. But within that, as if anybody here has had ever had a sort of an in-depth conversation with the wrong sort of an accountant, for example, you quite quickly can get lost in the minutiae and actually miss the point. And you know, this, the second part of this is that, you know, the realization that simply generating great analytics isn't going to lead to the results unless the business is ready, willing, and able to act on those analytics. Now that's key. I think one of the things that we would observe across the sort of the business landscape at large is that if you were to stare into the boardroom of a business in the 90s, only as close by as the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, the common currency of board members was financial literacy. So you would have your CFO, who let's say would be quote unquote kind of degree finance, but the rest of that board community were all incumbent upon all of them to be, you know, financially dexterous, to really understand the machine, you know, the machinations of running a business and operating a business, running a P&L, and the mechanical elements of a successful operation. The conversations we have these days are very much more around actually, well, finance is somewhat accepted as given. For a long time, technology, data, IT leaders were put under the spotlight of, you guys just don't get commerce, you guys don't get business, you don't engage enough, so you know, you can stay in the background. That shift has occurred. The last decade has very much seen technology leaders build functions that talk and speak and understand the language of the organization, so that top to bottom, they really can understand the contribution they make to the success of a business, of an institution, of a university, and articulate their value add through what they do. So in the here and now, that boardroom dynamic has shifted, and it has very much been, if a technology leader is the only person in that community, in that board community, who gets the importance of technology, of data, of security, of cyber, of the, dare I say it, of you know, the importance of risk management associated with that, the exploitation of analytics as a part of that data strategy, and the value of the underlying value of those invested data assets. Sure, they will be the domain expert there, but it's actually incumbent upon the rest of that board to have educated themselves to that point too. Otherwise, you know, our perspective on that is very much, if you're, you know, if you as a senior technology leader and data leader, whatever it may be, are looking around that room and you're the only one who gets it, seek out a new board, because that's a business that is not going to be here for much longer. If they don't understand how they should be using these assets to deliver their business ever more effectively, meet their customer needs in an ever more appropriate manner, and evolve their services and products accordingly based on real insight, real understanding, then yeah, that is a big sell sign and a time to get out. And I suppose inherent in that is your part as a professional, as a specialist in this domain, to really have not only the inherent curiosity that is, I think, endemic in people who are taking this on as a sort of a professional domain, but also to invest in those interpersonal skills that says actually you have the presence, insight, and leadership awareness to build out relationships, to bring people on a journey, take them to what bring them to what you can do for them, and then take them on the journey to achieving those shared goals. So a very quick whistle-stop tour of our view of why and where data is quite so important at the moment, and indeed that frankly it isn't going to go away, why it's important to us as recruiters and what we look for. But I'm very keen to answer your questions around that, because very happy that we share perspectives on what we see businesses asking for, what do they value, but also then frankly, if we can help, kind of advise and guide on, once you've completed your academics, where next? How do you go? So I'll wrap myself up and open it to the floor.
Okay, thanks, Matt, for a very interesting talk. Do any of the students have any questions for Matt? You can enter the question in the chat, or you can unmute and ask the question. So I can start off, Matt. So, if you're involved in recruitment in data scientists, have you worked with Cardiff University before? Or have you recruited any students, worked with any former students from Cardiff University?
Not to my knowledge. We have we've worked across the education sector at large. Education, but not that I can think of in terms of Cardiff Uni.
Fernando, you've got a question?
Yeah, so I was really sort of like, am I muted? Can you hear me?
No.
Yes.
Yep.
Loud and clear.
It says to me you're muted anyway. So I like the slide when you talked about the digital literacy and saying, that we understand data. The thing is about the more data we have and we understand, and the more we are taken to action to do something upon it. And I find that's one of the hardest things to do now, is to come up with data, but actually get people to action them to do something about it. Because it's one thing having data that says this is the trend, but it's another trusting that data going, this is holistic and this is what we need. Do you find that this is getting better as time goes by? Because it was a pretty positive slide there, at least the message that you gave, I think. But the most trouble that I'm having with partners, with collaborators is, okay, we have some data, but do they trust it enough to actually do something about it? Although they acknowledge that this is something is a problem or a trend, is this becoming sort of like something that there's just too much data out there and anybody can spin out the data that they want, or is this I just want your opinion about how problematic you're finding it.
Interesting question. I mean, I think it goes back to the old adage of, there are sort of lies, downlies, and statistics. And I think you've got a business so the level of understanding that I think people are seeking is ever more complex. So is there, if I'm understanding your question rightly, is there a drive to find the answer by justifying it? If you look for an answer hard enough, you'll find it. But actually, the big leap of faith is really looking into the data and trusting the outcomes from it. Now, that I think is the step change that's occurring within businesses, because the whole data function has shifted from being, if I was to go back 15, 20 years, this was about information management. It was about, dare I say it, glorified kind of filing cabinets that are well managed with a sort of librarian kind of type curation. Now it is about actively throwing the doors open to the world to create, to capture ever broader data sets in order to gain the insights that are going to be valuable. So I think we've got an evolution of the reach of access of data, but also an evolution of the complexity of question that can be asked. Now, the talent that I see that we are looking for are people who can answer just that question that you're asking, which is, are we asking the right question? And I think if this, this goes back to, sort of the fundamental principles. I don't know if you've ever seen the film about the computers who were the women who did the computing behind the first moon launch. Yeah, actually, this was one of the big questions around automation. Actually, computers couldn't do the sums they needed to do. Well, sorry, automated machines couldn't do the sums that they could do until they. But once they bought a big mainframe, it was an IBM thing. Actually, the skill shifted away from pure computational power in somebody's brain into using the computers to ask the right question. Now that's the evolution. So it's this consistent evolution of, and as a data profession, it is not just about reaching out and grabbing the goodies on the shelves that can say, great, we can get more data to justify a point. Actually, it's about taking your audience, your stakeholder community on the journey that says, we've created, we've accessed the right data, and this is an outcome that has veracity. And you know what, it is taking, and the interpersonal piece that Jonathan has asked the question around there is about that kind of sense of authority, sense of understanding, sense of credibility that says, I understand business agenda, I understand the commercial objectives, and therefore the insights I'm sharing are credible, reasonable, and reliable. I think I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thank you. And yes, I have seen the film.
It's an awesome movie.
It is. It's amazing.
Absolutely awesome movie. And but one of those, I met with the HR director of Siemens, so Group HR director of Siemens, sorry, HR director of Siemens in the UK, and they're about the time the movie came out, actually, and his view was that that they were absolutely heading for the embracing artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotic process automation. But their plan was absolutely minimalized human resource redundancy, because it was all about automate, simplify, create higher value, and it was on exactly that paradigm. It was, if we've hired the right people, we've hired right people, they will adapt. Marks and Spencer hit some. This was about 12, 18 months ago. In fact, probably a little bit longer than 12 months ago, because it was pre-pandemic. But it was in the run up to the prior Christmas. They hit some controversy because they were moving people out of contact centers and into stores because they were driving chatbot and kind of AI-based customer interaction online and on mobile. And it was, at the time, it was seen as redeployment and a backdoor to redundancy. But their point was, where are our customers? And how do we serve out that human interaction best with the highest, with the appropriate skilled base? And actually discovered that the online and voice channels were all about simple account inquiries that were simple, repeatable stuff. People, and again, this is not a deep data science piece, but people then can be used to engage with the intangibles of a human being.
So there's a question in the chat. So you mentioned social skills. What kind or type of social skills should an aspiring data scientist have?
I think in every sense, this comes down to interpersonal skills. This is the ability to listen, the ability to and to speak in uncluttered, easily accessible language that mirrors your audience. As simple as that. And that is a universal set of skills that applies to leadership in all kind of domains. Best companies who you'll see on an annual basis create a best companies list with the Sunday Times. They do top 100 every year. They measure the distance between chief exec and shop floor in whatever context that is. And those that have got the shortest distance, it always relates directly to the effectiveness of communications in a given organization. And that distance between boardroom and shop floor is always shortened by an absolute understanding of the contribution of each person in each role to the objectives of the organization. So if you place yourself into that as a data scientist, or as a data professional, you are constantly questioning and interrogating kind of knowledge bases to define the right route forward on something. Your specialism is beyond the grasp of sort of the demands of the specific specialism are beyond the grasp of almost most of the people in the organization, on a detailed point. Your outcomes are the currency of the whole organization. So you need to be able to present those in terms in which the organization can both be equally fascinated and can be led and find interesting, and then base sound commercial decisions upon it. If you stay in your domain and only talk in terms to which your peer group understand, then bluntly, you will never influence anybody outside of your peer group. And some of that really does mean pushing yourself to do things differently. Years and probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, I did a piece of work for an internet search provider who are not the one that everybody uses. And they had a bunch of data scientists who were doing some incredibly exciting work on the algorithms that do the autocomplete on, if you put in pizza, it comes up with Express, or it comes up with the other pizza restaurants that are within 400 foot of wherever you happen to be stood with your mobile phone. Fascinating stuff, really quite complex algorithms at the time. We walked into a room and nobody spoke to anybody. Nobody had phones, nobody spoke to anybody, and everybody communicated by instant messenger, as it was then. And that would give you a hint as to what the search engine was. But they were communicating, they were all sat within, kind of 2 foot of another human being, and nobody spoke. And that was a function that were buried in a dark room. And it was a curious sort of dynamic to find. It said, actually, these are the people who are now, so some of those folk will now be the people who are shaping the future of the commercial propositions within those organizations and businesses. But that kind of a dynamic, perhaps in a dev space, in an engineering space, might be allowed to. But if you look at the the most extreme edge programming environments, which are typically betting and gaming, they've now kind of completely opened the lid on that. And if you walk around somewhere like a Sky Bet or a William Hill, you will find very open spaces that are highly customized by the people who reside in them, and they are absolutely incentivizing people to break out, to communicate, to engage, to enthuse and advocate, rather than just sit somewhere in a dark room and do really cool, bright stuff.
Any further questions?
So is that something that would be sort of tested at application stage for in thinking about our graduates and where they're about to go on to? Is that something that those companies would be looking to test? And how would our graduates sort of plan to meet those or to show that they've got those skills?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think some of those are difficult to test. I think no doubt organizations will use a variety of psychometric assessments and things like that. They will use assessment centers where they'll watch how people interact with people. But in reality, I think there is a big responsibility for people to bring that stuff to the fore. And I've had I've done a sort of series of talks in the past, both with actually with school leavers, but also with MBA grads, and there is that sort of point that says, if all you're coming with is a certification, no matter how high grade that certification is, there's always going to be somebody who's done something else. And it's that something else that shows that you have not just had your head down doing your academic study with that academic focus, because yes, that the rigor and concentration and capability and sheer intellectual horsepower that displays is good. But consider the next person along who has gone out and created a code club, who has leaned in and helped on a startup, or has done some volunteer work for, you know, a charitable cause in and used their domain skills to whatever it may be. Now, these are just sort of curious examples, but I think it is that point of saying where you can broaden broaden yourself, that has innate value to an employer. And I think it is something that, you know, even when I sort of, you know, and forgive, this is a curious analogy, but even when I've spoken to as an alumnus of my school, went back and spoke to kids doing GCSEs. You know, I went to a grammar school, so they're innately bright kids, but it's that case of if all you're bringing is a set of A stars or 9s or whatever they're now currently graded as, that's great. But think of the person with the same grade who's lent into a bunch of other stuff, whatever that might be, around their passions, about stuff they enjoy. They become immediately more human, immediately more textured. They've got a bit more interest to them. And that, I think, is the stuff that says, as difficult as it is in the current climate, hoover up as much value as you can from being at university. You know, that, you know, universities will offer and can offer, you know, a whole host of different experiences and opportunities and windows that you can look through, frankly, climb through, to get wider experience.
Okay, so there's another question in the chat. I want to know if there's a chance of getting a job, even if you don't have much industry experience as an international student.
So I think there's, I'm going to try and interpret that question, because I think the question is, could be sort of, is obviously talking about somebody's concern or fear. I think, yeah, that if I look at the trend over the last decade, you know, some firms, particularly in the tech sector, have been taking people directly out of universities. You know, they've been actively targeting PhD talents. They've been targeting MSc talent because of the, you know, the kind of the intellectual rigor of the analytical work they've been doing in university. So on one hand, you could say yes, there is a very clear path into those environments for those for some students. I think in other sectors, people want more, and I think that's where some of that wider participation in university life is going to be helpful. International students, that's an interesting question to pose, and I'm not, if I'm honest, I'm not sure what the consideration there is, but I think if I look at most of our clients, an international perspective is a healthy thing. So you have an innate advantage, and I think, so, you know, if you can bring that to bear, then that is a good thing. And I think if that implies a certain degree of multilingual experience as well, that is a good thing. So I think it's about recognizing what the arrows in your quiver are, and how you might best use them, if that makes some sense.
And a follow-up, also for students of computer science backgrounds, can they apply for I guess these data science positions, because they would cover some data analytics, but maybe, you know, they're not a specialist in data analytics?
Yeah, so I think the one thing I would call out is that sort of I've used some very generic terms around data science, data analytics, and so forth. But actually, the one thing that we would see is that, particularly if you look, I mean, take government as a good example, they have the DDAT kind of skill set, which is all around kind of data technology, design analytics, and so forth. And it's a really broad church. In doing a bit of background reading for this presentation, if you go to the Prospect website, there's a whole host of stuff around data, and there's a bunch of people who, even in that context, have come out of university as physicists. Now, you know, if you were to be slightly rude about physicists for a moment, Yeah, the IOP, so the Institute of Physicists, is one of the fastest dwindling institutes in the UK. Their membership is declining year on year, and they're battling hard against that, because actually, once you leave university as a physicist, there is nobody standing there going, now you can become a professional physicist, short of Dr. Brian Cox, and I think he's got the one job stitched up for that, because that job's pretty well taken. However, if you look at the disciplines within a physics degree that is largely around maths, analytics, and so forth, that is analogous with computer science, and there are career paths all the way through data that go with that. And I think the biggest success in data over the last, probably accelerated through the last 5 or 6 years, has been that shift from, we need some people who do data, into data engineers, data scientists, and through to data architecture, through to chief data officer. And it's that recognition of, dare I say, chief data officer as a C-suite board role in some instances, or as a part of an extended exec board, that then gives the freedom for people to take very distinct and specialist paths through that and apply their skills accordingly. So I hope that answers that question.
I think it does. So just around a question around remote working. So most companies and organizations have moved to a model where their employees don't have to physically be in a particular location. So are companies finding it now easier to hire better staff, that they have removed that constraint about physically moving to a location, because they can, let's say, cast their net a lot further and potentially hire people who maybe would have been resistant or wouldn't want to move in the past, but now are applying for these jobs because they can do it remotely, potentially better candidates?
Yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic at the moment. So, and it's one that every business is struggling with or wrangling with. I think I caused some controversy because I commented on a post that included one of the landlords of one of our offices. Somebody we placed into a role had made a slightly cynical comment around the fact that a property investor was suggesting that working from home didn't work. But I sort of felt that was perhaps a little bit obvious. But I think if I look across the spectrum of the businesses we work with, from major sort of corporate, so FTSE 100, FTSE 10 businesses, through to central government, through to large charities, through to startups and SMEs, as well as family-owned businesses, there isn't a single entity that isn't wrestling with finding the right balance. Very few are demanding that people snap back to the offices. Most are identifying that there are some benefits to be had in hybrid working, and only now beginning to recognise that through that dynamic they're accessing new talent pools and accessing ever more diverse talent pools and ever more kind of creative hiring choices. So to answer the question in a sort of roundabout way, I think it's a really exciting time. I've had, in fact, only last evening, I'm doing a piece of work with a very large sort of parcel delivery business, and I've posed that very question, which says, look, you're historically based in the East Midlands. I've got interest from the Southeast and London. How feasible is that for you? Because they feel their current requirements, and this is in technology leadership, but their current roles are being well served remotely. Can you offer that continuity? If they're prepared to be in the office from time to time, a couple of days a week maybe, you have a win here, because you can afford, you can kind of, sorry, not afford, you can reach a more diverse and challenging candidate base.
So do you think, sort of linking a couple of things together that you've said about the remote working and those sort of social skills, I mean, do you think that this sort of switch to remote working is going to affect that social skills? Because I think, me personally, I've missed that kind of office banter and just having a chat with someone when you're, making a coffee and all that. We haven't really got that thing at the moment, have we? I mean, we sit on video calls, but you haven't got that social interaction that you would have if you were based in an office.
That's an interesting point to raise, and Emily's smiling because she and I have a constant dialogue about this. So naturally, I'm an introvert. I'm quite happy sat here on my own. Being around people tires me out, and so I've loved this. Now, don't get me wrong. The overwhelming anxiety that goes with a pandemic hasn't been fun for anybody, but the whole ability to not engage with dashing around the country every day to meet clients and candidates has been a welcome relief, and the advantages for for speed of access to people has been hugely beneficial. But I think you're right. I think there will be. I mean, there was a social anthropologist I saw an interview with who aligned this with the last time there was a pandemic exercise. What came after was the Roaring '20s. So this massive push to gather and to socialize and interact. So I think there will be a pull for that. I think already, though, you can see there are new platforms developing where you are not yourself online. You have an avatar, and there are platforms, and this is for to accommodate that social aspect of remote working, which is within that you can drop in. Most video is one way, or is very sequential in the sense that one person speaks and then another person speaks. These new platforms allow an overlay of dialogue, but also allows a couple of people to hive off into a smaller chat room and then to rejoin and so forth with some latent background dialogue. So it mimics an office. But put it a different way, I don't think we're going to be able to stop people. I don't think there will be much that will stop people regathering and reconnecting. And I think already we're seeing clients starting face-to-face interviews, building the 30 minutes for a COVID test into the beginning of the interview session, and so forth. So people buy people, and that's a very human experience, and we, by our very nature, we are to a certain degree pack animals, so we will gather, and I think the opportunity to continue evolving our relationships in the workplace is a really important thing to do.
Cool. Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Cool. So are there any final questions? If not, we can bring the session to a close. So thanks again, Matthew and Emily.
A couple of people typing, but whether they...
Look, my pleasure for speaking. If you'll find either Emily or myself on LinkedIn. There we go.
There we go.
If I read the mind. I'm not an algorithm that predicted that, I promise. But I'd have made a slightly thinner one with better hair were I to be that. But yeah, no, please, by all means, look us out. You'll find us there. Whether we will be of immediate use to you is one thing, but we're always looking to understand who the future leaders are. So you're coming from a great school, and that's a big part in the building blocks of a good career. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak.
Okay, so thanks again.
Thanks a lot.